Welcome, champions, to the next in my series of diving even deeper into a single champion and dissecting what a formation designed for them looks like, and going into detail about why it works. Today we're setting our focus on Krond, the chaotic evil half-orc fighter. He is considered one of the top dogs when talking about DPS, dealing damage, concaving skulls with his two-handed mace. If you watched my last video on the newcomer Warduke, you're actually going to see a few parallels, because they have two things in common. First and most important, the concept of scaling a pre-stack multiplier. I'm going to be feeling a bit of deja vu here, so why don't I just steal from myself and rehash my explanation of what pre-stack versus post-stack is from Warduke. Let's say we have 5 times 5 times 5. Which equals 125. We have a 2 times multiplier to work with. If we apply that to the post, that means we take that 125 with our times 2 for a total of 250. But if we apply that to the pre, that means all of those 5s are getting that times 2. So now we're talking 10 times 10 times 10, which equals 1000. So increasing the pre-stack ends up with a much larger number in contrast to increasing the post-stack. Thank you, past Tyredack. So with this in mind, let's take a look at Survival of the Fittest. Krond will increase his damage for every champion slotted in your formation that is either evil or has a strength score of 16 or higher. This is both multiplicative and bonuses scale up the pre-stack, and becomes one of the girthiest buffs in the game. So it really sets the stage for Krond to take off. Before we dive deeper into who scales well with this, let's take a look at the rest of his kit. He also gains Eldritch Strike, where when he attacks an enemy, they will receive more damage from his cantrip spells on subsequent attacks. His cantrips being his Specialization Choice, which is between Thunderclap, which deals AoE damage to enemies, Shocking Grasp, which deals damage to his primary target, being the frontmost enemy, and stuns them for 3 seconds. Or Firebolt, which will launch 3, you guessed it, bolts of fire at random enemies. A few things to note here. First, these cantrips are counted as magical attacks, and his primary attack is a physical melee, so he's technically both melee and magic, meaning formation abilities like Ulcoria's spellcasting school do technically work with him, though she's not an ideal support to pair with him. Now, Eldritch Strike itself has no means of scaling, no feat, no gear, but the cantrips themselves do gain a gear slot to increase their damage output. So which cantrip should you choose? The de facto choice is Thunderclap. It gives him a cleave to wave clear, which is very useful. If you're desperate for some additional CC, you might take Shocking Grasp, but it's the least output performing as Firebolt damages multiple times, so it's a great pick if you're looking to deal some armor shredding damage. His ultimate is a very simple AoE clear, he gains no other benefits from it. Now let's jump back into Survival of the Fittest. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever broken down exactly how scaling works in regards of gear to formation abilities to feats. So let's go ahead and do that right now, using Survival of the Fittest as an example. Shall we? As you likely know, gear comes in 4 rarity variants: common, uncommon, rare, and epic. You can also increase their effectiveness with shiny and golden. But how is that all calculated? Let's take a look. Each rarity has an amount it will increase the ability, and that amount depends on what the gear slot does. Looking at Survival of the Fittest, we have common at 25%. Uncommon at 87.5%, rare at 150%, and epic at 275%. Shiny will increase this by 50%, bringing it to 412.5%, and golden will increase it by 100%, ultimately bringing it up to 550%. But then we have to consider the item level of that gear. For every level above 1, you increase this by 0.4%. So let's look at my Krond, who I really haven't focused on, but who does have an epic shiny at item level 97. An epic shiny starts out at 412.5%, like I said. So let's find the 0.4% of that, which we would multiply it by 0.004. 1.65. So we multiply that by all of our item level above 1, 96 in this case, 158.4. Now we add those together, 412.5 plus 158.4. And look at that, 570.9. Now, the base percent survival of the fittest before modifiers offers is 3,200%. And since we're multiplying it by a percent, that means we have to divide it by 100 and add 1. So 570.9 divided by 100 plus 1, 6.709 times 3,200 for 21,468.8 or 2.14 E4. Now this is a multiplicative bonus and we have 10. So since we're multiplying by percents again, we take that 21,468.8 and divide it by 100 plus 1 again for 215.688. As we have 10 being multiplied, we can put that to the power of 10 for 2.17 E23 and multiply that back by the 100 for the final percent of 2.17 E25. So what about feats? Krond has 2 feats for survival of the fittest, one at 80% and one at 40%, which throws a wrench into everything, since this increase is to the pre-stack. So let's apply what we've learned. 21,468.8 times 1.4, 40%, is 30,056.32, times 1.8, 80%, is 54,101.376, or 5.41 E4. Then 542.01376 to the power of 10 for 2.18 E27 times 100 for the final percent of 2.18 E29. And there you have it. Hopefully now you understand a bit more the impact of gear or the rarity or the item level or feats all have. Now, I mentioned we have 10 multipliers for survival of the fittest. That is because, for this example, I have 10 slotted champions who are either evil or with a strength of 16 or higher. This is the other parallel I was talking about earlier with Warduke, as one of his specializations has him scale with evil champions as well. But now we're free to pick up those with a 16 plus strength who aren't evil. For those who don't know, let me introduce you to a handy tool for this game, this website here, which will be in the description below. You can do a great many things with it, but what I'm going to do is showcase the ability to narrow down champions based on restrictions. Let's look at the visual party builder and set the restrictions of survival of the fittest, evil, and strength 16 plus. Let's make sure it's set to or, not and, because that would make it a little too narrow of a selection. Let's also enable all feats, so we know every potentially usable champion. We have some strong options, but I'm always an advocate for Desmond plus Daddies. That is Veronica in seat 1, Blushi in seat 2, Spurt in seat 3, and Desmond in seat 4. Seeing as the Daddies are all evil and Desmond has 16 strength, who work so well together because Desmond scales with those who count as dead, and Veronica, Blushi, and Spurt can all count as dead. They are a perfect fit for some amazing output, especially if you're running Xerxes for that tasty +4 lament for Desmond. With a feat, we can make catt-brie viable as well, with 16 strength. Torogar is both evil and has strength to boot, while being an excellent buffer for evil champions, which Krond is. Then we have a selection of some good tanks with high strength, with Ayla as a strong debuffer who can be swapped in her own seat with Makos, who is evil if need be for a little burst switch. Briv as an excellent tank, healer, and speed. Now for this last spot, there is a little wiggle room. For this example, I'm using Celise, but she's not necessarily the best fit or best buffer. Point being, we're missing a seat 11 buffer, where 2 of the best buffers in the entire game exist, Avren and Nova. The problem? They do not meet the requirement to scale up survival of the fittest, which is unfortunate. But it's likely that their buffing strength will outweigh that, so let's take a look here. This is my Bud being set with a baseline Krond formation without Avren or Nova. The last spot in my formation could be Celise, Melf, Neres, Warden, Tatiana, Grim, they're all going to be pretty equal for me. We're just using Celise for the example. Now this is my bud just by replacing Celise with Avren. We have one less survival of the fittest, so we're down to 9 now. But Avren's buffing power is simply that good. Then we have Nova, who is so powerful because as we've gone over before, you can double up on her formation ability, the Crew, with Valentine receiving the opposite of the 2 to 3 slot variation of your DPS, as long as you've taken Nova's first specialization, which means we have to use Valentine over Briv. That's losing 2 from survival of the fittest since neither Valentine or Nova qualify. However, it is such a powerful combination currently that even with those negatives, the net positive is still a better output. There is one other champion to mention that does not fit within the confines of survival of the fittest that can be of use, and that is Nrak. With a feat, Krond can qualify for the Wisdom 14 restriction, and this does increase the scaling of survival of the fittest, higher than it otherwise would be without, but not enough to justify using Nrak over an actual support. But something to potentially keep in mind if your champion starved early on or when restrictions kick in. So enough about all the numbers and damage. How is his availability? Well, he's in for 3 out of 4 patrons and good to go for all but the charisma restriction of Day 1 Trials of Mount Tiamat, and he qualifies for a fair amount past that. So decent, but he is still held back a little bit. At the end of the day, you don't have to use either Desmond plus Deddies or Nova plus Valentine or Avren or anything, but you do want to stay within the confines of his survival of the fittest, the best you can, as it's his entire purpose to scale that horde. So at least find some evils and strength 16 pluses to slot with him. If that's not interesting to you, maybe this dope-ass chaotic evil half-orc eldritch knight ain't for you. Thanks for spending your time here with me today. Slap that like, sub, and bell, and stay tuned because I'm always working on the next one. Have a hell of a time out there, champions.